what I want to say is that this is what governments intend. They want this. This is not something that our government seeks to solve. This is something that our government is, I think, going to seek to promote. It will want to appear to be trying to solve it, but the net effect will be to make the problem worse, and I think that is deliberate. Okay, now if I show you some of the news reports, now that's France takes aim at UK PM's migration double talk after Channel sinking. And then you have the next one, Channel migrants, Emmanuel Macron and Boris Johnson clash over crisis. That is pantomime, that's distraction, that's a pretense that there is, that's Macron and Johnson colluding in a bit of theatre to keep us distracted. Now the background to that is the numbers coming in. Migrant crossings, numbers reaching UK this year, 3 times 2020's total. Let me just go down a bit. The numbers are, the Home Office said 886 people arrived on Saturday. That's not today, that's last Saturday, Saturday the 20th, bringing the 2021 total to more than 25,700. The figure for the last year was nearly 8,500. So more than 1,000 migrants arrived in one day earlier this month, a new record. And none of them are getting deported. What I want to do is to play you a little bit of this video. I found it on the Sun's website. This is quite a funny and embarrassing cross-examination of the minister, and I'll show you. Now this gentleman, the gentleman who's getting cross-examined here is Tom Pursglove. There's his picture, Tom Pursglove. I think we can say he's the fall guy. He looks a bit of a Gumby there. So this is one thing I'm noticing is the people who are fronting the government's excuses for this look like fall guys. But make your own mind up about this fella.
France, can you tell us how many asylum seekers or how many people arriving have been returned to any EU country in the course of the last year or since January?
Well, returns related to small boat arrivals. The answer to that is 294 overall.
294?
No, it's not.
In the last, this year?
The answer in this year is 5.
Right. So in 2021...
He looked pretty embarrassed there. He's not happy to be there.
At a time when the number of people arriving has gone up, you've just been able to return 5 people.
What that means is basically of the none are getting returned. It's 5 out of 25,700. It's something like 1/50th of 1%. Now the wider picture is net migration. Sorry, not net migration, but migration to the UK in general. Now, if you go to the Migration Observatory, that's based at Oxford University. I think its figures are probably reliable. What that shows is migration to the UK. If you look at this one, long-term immigration, emigration and net migration. So I can't stand the net immigration figure because it's the potential for fiddling the figures is so strong there. Just look at the numbers coming in and that will give you an idea. And they don't identify who the numbers are going out. I suspect a lot of them are ethnic British people, but for immigration, numbers coming in, that's in 2019 numbers coming in. If you can see that 677,000 came in. Now emigration, that was 407. We don't know who they were, but the numbers coming in 677,000. That's the number that I prefer to work on. If you go down here and you look at net migration by citizenship, what you see is that the turquoise colour, that's non-EU. Net immigration was 282,000. So and total, and that's about the same as the number for total net migration in general. Although I say again, net migration is I think a very unreliable yardstick. So 677,000. Okay, so the ones who are returned, these are those returns they fall into three groups: forced returns and voluntary returns, and people who are denied entry at airports and ports. So in 2020, enforced returns, that amounted to 3,327. That's a bit under 1/2 of 1% of the total numbers of people immigrating to the UK. And then of voluntary returns in 2020, there were 4,646. That's a bit over. That's about, I would say, about 0.7 of 1%. And then so what you have, people who are returned, who are told to leave. So the ones who are told, you're told to leave and you say, no, I'm not leaving, and you're told, right, we're going to force you to go. That's less than 0.5%. The ones who have said, right, you've got to go, and they say, oh, well, okay, I will go, that is a bit more than half of 1%. And the numbers who turn up at an airport or at a port, that's just over 10,000. I make that about 1.5%. So about 2.5% of the 677,000 who migrate to the UK every year get either turned away or forced to leave. That is an open door immigration policy. It's not quite as open door as the Channel crossing is, where only 1/50th of 1% so far this year have been returned, but that is still an open door immigration policy. The question then is why to have open door immigration policy. It seems to me pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and that is, if you don't have control of your borders, if you don't have any border control, you don't have immigration policy. You have effectively washed your hands of it, and you've handed that over to someone else. You've said, we're going to let someone else decide what our immigration policy is. We will subcontract it out to someone else. And the people that you subcontract it out to will be the people who invest the most into it, who put the most into doing it. And the people who put the most into doing it, who invest the most into it, are the people who make the most money out of it. And the people who make the most money out of it will be the people who are most determined, most ruthless and unscrupulous. Basically, the epitome of the migrant crossing gangs, the illegal or the people smugglers who are operating at the moment. They are the people that currently politicians say are the enemy. They're the people that politicians say they want to oppose. But I think they are, in fact, the ally of current governments, or certainly of our government, because it's effectively our government's subcontracting to them, saying, we want you to decide this immigration policy. We can't do it. We can't come out and say we want to maximise illegal immigration. We want to get it going at full blast at all times. But you can, you the migrant gangs, you can do it, and that is what I think it is happening. Because then, if the government can say we're not able to close our borders, we can't do it, they're effectively able to wash their hands completely to say we're not able, we don't have an immigration policy, we can't have, it isn't our job to decide immigration policy, and then whilst giving it over to the worst people on earth to have it. The effect of that is to get somebody else to do your dirty work for you, to increase that immigration. Mass immigration is really useful if you are a politician. That's why there seems to be a cross-party incentive, an agreement that mass immigration should be allowed and promoted and maximised at all times. The reason for that, I keep saying it, I say it again, is that it makes us easier to rule. It grinds us down. It takes away our sense of identity. It takes away any sense of unity of home. It reduces our conditions of life. It makes us more restricted. It imposes the politics of guilt. that makes us, it puts guilt trips on us. All of those things make us easier to manage, which any wife beater, any spousal abuser will understand. Take away your spouse's sense of identity, your spouse's sense of their own autonomy, of unity with friends. Make them feel guilty, make them feel worthless, make them feel bad about themselves, and you will get more power over them. So the power game that politicians have is partly to increase the powers they have, but also to decrease the power that you have relative to them. All of that increases their power, and they are in the power game. And that is why maximising immigration, particularly the worst forms of immigration, is so much in the interest of politicians, which that explains why they're constantly crawling to Muslims and Muslim opinion and saying how wonderful Islam is and how we must have more of it and what a great contribution it makes, despite having made only a harmful contribution to the UK or to Western countries in general. Now, what I'd like to do is to look at how this began, how this started out. Now, and if I do that, what I want to do is to begin by looking at what's called the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Immigration and Future Border. I don't know, I shudder to think what a future border is, but you have to go back to the early days of the Blair government. Now, the person who was basically made Minister for Immigration Minister, or the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Immigration, was this gentleman Michael O'Brien. He was basically the Secretary of State for Immigration from the 5th of May, from Blair's election 97, for just over 4 years until 2001. Now, he appears to have remained as Under-Secretary of State for Immigration, but to have handed over Minister of State for Asylum and Immigration to Barbara Roche in 99. So he was Minister of State for Immigration for a bit over 2 years. She was Minister of State for Immigration for just under 2 years, from 99 onwards, while he remained as Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Immigration. Now, if you go to his Wikipedia page, I think that's him there. You can look at this. What you find is the first thing he did as Minister of State for Immigration was to visit the Home Office and to declare it to be a complete shambles and to say it needed to be reorganised. But what he then did, now this is from the BBC's website in 1998, UK Journey's End for passport checks. What he did was to abolish passport controls for people leaving the UK. And I'll explain what I think might have been going on there. Now, if I read that story. Immigration officers are to stop checking passports at British ports and airports despite staff warning that their jobs will be made more difficult. More difficult means they won't be able to do them. From April, the £3 million spent on embarkation controls, that means checking your passport when you leave the country. Because if you've gone on holiday recently, you'll notice you show your passport when you come into Britain, you don't show it when you leave. So embarkation controls, described as routine and unproductive by Home Office Minister Mike O'Brien, will be used to try to detect the rising numbers of people entering the country illegally. No, that's nonsense. If you go to this document, the annual report and accounts for the Home Office, what you find is that the visas and immigration section has a budget of about almost £2 billion. So that £3 million, that's a tiny amount. I think about a tenth or 1.5% of that budget. It's not, well, it certainly hasn't made any difference in detecting people trying to enter the country illegally. But the Immigration Service Union has criticised the move, saying it will be harder to ensure that illegal immigrants ordered out of the country have actually left. The union blames a general lack of effectiveness of embarkation controls on underinvestment by the government. So what they're saying, I think, is quite right. If you don't know who's left the country, you don't know who's overstayed their visa. You don't know who is here illegally, which is why for about 20 years now, whenever the government has been asked how many illegal immigrants are there in the UK, they've said, we don't know, we have no idea. The figures I've heard over the years have been between 750,000 and 2 million, but we just don't know. The effect of this would have been, and the foreseeable effect of this would have been to make it very hard to police immigration, and I wonder if that was the real intended purpose. I don't believe it was to plough £3 million back into preventing people from entering illegally. I think that's nonsense. So I want to say a little bit more about Mike O'Brien, just so you know a bit more about him. He was as the Home Office Minister, this is from his Wikipedia page, responsible for race relations. He, with Jack Straw, set up the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. That was the Macpherson report. He later endorsed the Macpherson report in a book, in this book here, Institutional Racism and the Police, Fact or Fiction. He contributed to that. And what he said is that the Macpherson report was a judicial report into matters arising out of the death of Stephen Lawrence. It was judicial proceedings. It was not intended to be political, although it was extremely political, I think, from the start. So this fellow, Mike O'Brien, teams up with Jack Straw. The report is about securing the commitment of all of us to tackling racism, whether open or unwilling, throughout our society, not just in the police force. So it's about forcing change on everyone's public opinion, your opinions and mine. That's what he's saying it was really about. Forget all that nonsense about it being a judicial inquiry. It's about changing opinion. The most important thing for all of us is that Britain is a multiracial society. He goes on and on and on. He says, that is why to be racist in today's multiracial Britain is to be un-British. That's what was to be established. The idea that the essence of Britishness is multiculturalism, multiracialism. The reason I'm saying this is because the person who is usually blamed for opening the gates is Barbara Roche. Now, I'll come back to her in a minute. I suspect some part of the reason why she's blamed is because she's Jewish, and also people want to, I think, pin some of this on the Jews, partly also because she's the one who came out with a big speech. Now, what I want to do is I want to look at an Evening Standard article, this one here, if you bear with me, that article there. Now, that Evening Standard report, that was written by a man called Andrew Nether. You may have heard of this article, in 2009. He's very pro-immigration, but even he was critical of what the politicians were doing in 2001. Don't listen to the whingers, London needs immigrants. That's where he's coming from. Now, what he talks about is there was a report by the Performance and Innovation Unit. That was Blair's think tank, saying we need more immigration, we need to open the doors. And that report formed the basis for a speech that Barbara Roche gave in September 2001. They had a lot of meetings beforehand. This was not an accident. It was thrashed out for months beforehand. Now, that report, I think, came out in January 2001. Drafts were handed out in summer of 2000 only with extreme reluctance. There was a paranoia about it reaching the media. Eventually published in 2001, the innocuously labelled RDS Occasional Paper number 67, Migration and Economic and Social Analysis, focused heavily on the labour market case. But the earlier drafts I saw also included a driving political purpose, that mass immigration was the way that the government was going to make the UK truly multicultural. I remember coming away from some discussions with the clear sense that the policy was intended, even if this wasn't its main purpose, to rub the right's nose in diversity and render their arguments out of date. That seemed to me to be a manoeuvre too far. So even for him, it was a manoeuvre too far. Ministers were very nervous about the whole thing, for despite Roche's keenness, Barbara Roche, her keenness to make her big speech and to be upfront. She wanted to be upfront. The other ministers wanted to keep quiet about it, keep it a secret. This was something they were planning under the radar. There was a reluctance elsewhere in government to discuss what increased immigration would mean, above all for Labour's core white working class vote. This shone through even in the published report, the social outcomes it talks about are solely those for immigrants. So it's not talking about social outcomes for voters, British voters, the people the politicians are supposed to represent. It's the social outcomes from the people who are not yet, but the government wanted to become British. And this first-term immigration policy got no mention among the platitudes on the subject in Labour's 1997 manifesto, headed Faster, Firmer, Fairer. The results were dramatic. In 1995, 55,000 foreigners were granted the right to settle in the UK. By 2005, that had risen to 179,000. Last year, so 2009, immigration falling thanks to recession, it was 148,000. And then he goes on to say, part by accident, part by design, the government had created its longed-for immigration boom. Now that boom has continued, as you saw, that it hit a high of 179,000 in 2005. Well, in 2019, it was 677,000. So massive, huge numbers. Now, that is something that Labour pushed through at its own expense. And I want to try and illustrate here the strength of commitment, why I think this is a cross-party incentive that is being pursued by politicians, because they'll pursue it even at the expense of their own political fortunes, their own electoral fortunes. So let me go to this one here. Now this is an article that was published in 2011 by Andrew Green, now Lord Green. He's from Migration Watch. But what he says is how about Labour's competence in government? A succession of 6 Home Secretaries and 8 Ministers of Immigration was a testament to the utter failure to focus on a subject of crucial importance to Britain's future. And then he goes on to say, the first Labour Home Secretary even to inquire about the numbers was Jackie Smith, but she too was gone in the twinkling of an eye. The reality is there was no government focus on the scale of immigration and no serious effort made to reduce it. In the end, Labour paid the price. Anger over mass immigration was the reason why so many of Labour's working class supporters did not vote at the last election. That was in 2010. That has continued. That's why you have a Labour red wall collapsing, but primarily because of, I think, fears and dislike over immigration. They were not alone in their verdict. An intriguing opinion survey found that when the public were asked what they regarded as the greatest failures of Tony Blair's time as Prime Minister, 62% pointed to the fact that immigration had reached unacceptable levels, even more than the 56% who chose the invasion of Iraq. Blair himself shows no remorse. His memoirs, which run to 690 pages, contain only 1 page on immigration. So that was Labour pursuing a hardline open borders immigration policy, even at the expense of its own electoral fortunes. And that's continuing. I think that's why Labour did even worse at the last election and did very badly, because Boris Johnson was saying, we are going to get control of our borders. Well, look, after Brexit, we will get control of our borders, he was saying. And the public wanted that, and so they deserted, working class voters in particular, deserted the Labour Party, and how they have been disappointed. You can't reform this system. I don't think this system is capable of reform. I don't know how it can be reformed, since it has been run for about 25 years now along these lines, the lines that it is there to undermine the British people and English people. It is there to undermine the sense of Britishness, the sense of Englishness, to turn us not into a self-aware nation with a sense of identity, but to turn us into communities. You don't hear the word nation being talked about. You won't hear people being called, you won't hear the term Englishman, whereas a century, 2 centuries ago, it was central to politics, the idea, the notion of being an Englishman. It was an overtly political term and something that people were proud of. You won't hear that being referred to these days. What you will hear is that there are communities, all these different, we're all part of a patchwork of communities. So there is no real identity. And this system that has been run so long by people who are so dedicated to increasing and maximising immigration, including, it doesn't really matter if it's legal or illegal, although illegal immigration will tend, I think, to be a little nastier, so that I think they're probably more in favour of illegal immigration. That will you can't reform that. To give you an example of what we're up against here, if I I'll give you a quick look at some news reports. They're all, this crisis is, or this migrant crisis, the Channel migrant crossings, are all being viewed by all the major media outlets and by the politicians as a problem for the migrants. It is the interests of the migrants that are put first. I have not seen any article anywhere saying what I think the majority of British people are saying, which is, we don't want these people here. They need to be sent back. They shouldn't be allowed to come here. So this is just from basically the last day, 2 days at most. I just picked them off the BBC's website this morning, okay, just at random. There are certainly much worse ones than this. Channel deaths, former asylum seeker on hellish journey to UK. Okay, so how bad it is for the poor asylum seekers. The next one, PM Boris Johnson shocked and saddened at migrant deaths. And then migrant crisis, the Channel beaches that host a lethal trade in human hope. And then final, this is a great one. I'll play you a little bit of this in a minute. Michael Morpurgo, he's a playwright, imagines a migrant story for the BBC. And what he does here is, listen here to the story in which he imagines the experience of a child rescued from a dinghy shipwreck. That is great stuff. It's better than the death of little Nell in Dickens. Okay, so that attitude that they have, that it is the interests of the safety of the migrants that is paramount, that is formal policy. I want to play you a little bit of a Sky News report from August 25th. Now that date, that's a month after Britain had entered into a deal where Britain handed over 54 million to France. That was in July. The date of this story is 21st of July 2021. So the government has given 54 million, France 54 million in bid to halt migrant crossings as 2020 figure surpassed. And so what the deal seems to be about is not protecting us. That's not 54 million to protect us. That is 54 million to protect the migrants. So if I do this, I don't know if you can read the text, what this fella's saying. What they're doing, that man, he looks a little bit like a migrant. That man is a French copper. He's patrolling the migrant crossings. And what he's saying is, we do not set up barriers at sea. In fact, we don't fight against illegal immigration at sea. We do relief and rescue. We are here to save people and prevent accidents.
On fait pas de digue en mer, on fait pas de lutte contre l'immigration irrégulière et clandestine en mer. On fait du secours et du sauvetage. On est là pour sauver les...
So that is the policy, that is the propaganda, to make things safer for the migrants. So I don't see any way that this can be reformed. This isn't, or particularly because this isn't a matter of migration, this is a matter of invasion. If you get a mass influx of people that you don't want arriving by force or by subterfuge, who you would like to stop but you can't, that is invasion. And that is confirmed by the fact that these are overwhelmingly, almost entirely fighting age males, and also by the fact that their intentions are the intentions of conquest and triumph and annihilationism, which is at the heart of Islamic doctrine, and most of the people coming here are Muslim, young Muslim males. It's also confirmed by the location, the places, and the numbers from which people are coming. They're coming from exactly the same location that the invasions of Hitler and Napoleon were planned, and from where William the Conqueror invaded. What I want to do is, if I show you this, bear with me. And then I go to, that's Operation Sea Lion. If I go there, Operation Sea Lion, that's Hitler's plan to invade the UK. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, what you see is the main points of embarkation were Boulogne, Calais, Dunkirk and Ostend. And today, most of the migrants are coming from Calais and Dunkirk, the same place. Napoleon, his flat-bottom boats were at Boulogne. He lay there for a year, threatening invasion. William the Conqueror, he set off from, I think, Saint-Valery-sur-Somme, down there. That's where his boats went across for the Battle of Hastings. So I think that's a confirming clue that this is an invasion. Another confirming clue is the sheer numbers. The numbers of Napoleon's Grande Armée only ever got the biggest it ever got to was 600,000 men, and he was once asked, "What's your budget, Monsieur Emperor?" And he said, "It's 60,000 lives a year." That's what he said. And the numbers of immigrants coming to the UK every year is 677,000. So it's significantly higher than the numbers that Napoleon had at his disposal. This is an invasion. It is not about humane immigration. It is not about humanity. If it were, even on its own terms, even if what they were saying were right, it could not be about humane policy, because a humane policy wouldn't leave the door open to anyone and everyone. It would try to sift through the people who are deserving, the people who are in need, and the people who are not. It wouldn't simply say, come one, come all. It seems to me that the humane thing to do would be to close down the visas and immigration section, save $2 billion a year, spend a little bit of money putting signs on buses going around town or going around foreign capitals saying, come one, come all, it's open house, we want you here. You get loads of benefits. Just we once you set foot in our country, we won't turn you away. That would probably be more humane than what they're doing at the moment. It is not. There is nothing humane about the policy. The question then is, how do you stop an invasion? The only way that I know is you sink the boats. If you have people invading you by boat, you sink those boats. I don't see any other way to do that. It's and this is where I get so frustrated that the responsible people like me who want to talk about this issue are cancelled or cast out or execrated as villains and silenced, and everyone is forced not to talk or even think about it. And that means you can't think of a more humane way to do it than the obvious crude ways that spring to mind, and that is sinking the boats. And the reason that could be a really unpleasant way to do it is if you start sinking migrant boats, those migrants over in Calais, they won't stop there. What they will do, I think they will do, is to enter into a game of chicken where they then say, right, we're now going to send over boats filled with children, filled with toddlers, and you won't have the nerve to sink those boats. Well, what do you do if you're being invaded by child soldiers? Well, in World War II, when we were fighting against members of the Hitler Youth, 14-year-olds, we killed them just the same as anyone else. They were effective soldiers, and we killed those. So, again, if that happens, I don't know what the alternative is to sinking boats filled with children that are being deliberately sent over. Now, that says two things. Firstly, that says we need to be able to talk about this in order to be able to work out better, more surgical, humane methods to put a stop to the problem. And secondly, it shows why the people who are currently... There's no way that the people who are running the open door system are going to suddenly flip and resort to methods like that. And what is sad about that is that it is probably quite simple. I think that the methods to achieve it probably can be done quite simply. My guess is all it would take in order to prevent that current invasion, those migrant crossings, is a few Dad's Army platoons just a handful of Captain Mannerings and Sergeant Wilsons. They might even be able to stop it on their own budget, on their own pensions money. The reason I say that is because technology is so advanced and cheap now. I'd have thought a few Dad's Army platoons with some drones and some heat-seeking cameras, maybe even a few Molotov cocktails just hanging from the drones that it can drop on the migrant boats in order to set fire to them. That it could be that would be quite a cheap way to prevent this happening. So it could be done very cheaply. I'm not advocating doing that. What I'm saying is it's so sad that we are not thinking through methods to deal with this, because the methods are probably available and readily to hand. For instance, we've had radar, which we use in order to detect German planes coming over. We've had that since about 1934-35 with the Tizard Committee that developed radar, Britain's radar system. Around my home, I have CCTV that can tell the difference between the human form or a dog walking around or a deer walking around. So it won't if a deer walks in front of the camera, it won't film it, but if a person does, and I buy that just for a few quid off the internet. It's cheap stuff, it's out of date already, but that's an idea of how cheap and effective the technology is, and it is sad that we're not even able to think about how to do it, because I suspect that the solutions are readily there. But instead we are dealing with the dreary old propaganda. Ain't it terrible, these poor migrants, these poor Muslim men in their 20s and 30s shouting at the border guards and coming and taking welfare and just living high on the hog. Ain't it terrible for them, that tired, stale old propaganda. Imagine that propaganda, it's impossible to imagine that propaganda being used, being applied to other invasions, to William the Conqueror's Norman invasion, to Napoleon's threatened invasion, or to Hitler's threatened invasion. To show that, I want to show you a few of these stories again. Imagine instead of Boris Johnson, that's Winston Churchill. PM Winston Churchill shocked and saddened at German Dornier bomber deaths. Or just imagine the next one, migrant crisis, the Channel beaches that host a lethal trade in Norman conquerors' hope. Or perhaps the next one we could have Michael Morpurgo imagines a Napoleonic conqueror's story for the BBC. Now I want to play you a little bit of this. I don't know if you can hear this. Michael Morpurgo, he was asked to imagine what it's like being a child migrant on one of these boats to the UK. And I do encourage you to I'm not going to go through all of this. It's about, I think, nearly 4 minutes long, but the sentimentality is fantastic. It's pure gold. Okay, so I don't know if you can hear this, but listen to this.
Be not inhospitable to strangers, lest they be angels in disguise.
There we are. So that's what he's saying. Let them all in, because they might be angels. Yeah, okay. I think we've learned over the last 30 years of mass immigration, they are not all angels. All right.
The seawater burns my throat.
He's imagining he's a little child migrant here. The seawater burns my throat.
Every time I open my mouth to breathe, the sea washes in. I tell my hands to hold on, but I know they will not be able to do as I say for much longer. I hang here, alone in the cold grey sea that heaves all about me. I look for a boat. I shout for a...
Okay, so you would have to be, as Oscar Wilde said, you would have to have a heart of stone not to laugh at it. Now, if I just play on a bit, you'll get... I mean, it comes to a sort of a crescendo of sentimentality towards the end. It's beautiful stuff. Delicious.
You cannot believe how wonderful it will be when we get there.
When we get to the UK, okay? You cannot believe how... This is what his mother has said to him. You cannot believe how wonderful it will be when we get there.
How welcoming they will be.
How welcoming.
So we must keep going and never give up. You hear me? Never give up. Never let go.
He's imagining this child migrant, his mother has just died, she's just drowned, but he is hearing her voice talking to him even though she's dead, and he's trying to get into the UK. And this is her saying to him, never give up, never let go.
I'm trying, Mama. I'm trying, I tell her. When I listen for her voice again, it is not there. I need to hear her. I call for her again and again. Mama! Mama! She does not answer. The sea water is in my mouth, choking me, burning my throat. My fingers will not hold. The sea comes over my head. Then another voice, a man's voice, a strong hand holding me. I am lifted up. There is a boat. I will live. I am coming, uncle, coming home.
There, isn't that nice? Now let me just cancel that. Isn't that nice? Doesn't that make you feel good? Coming, mama, mama, help me. That is the propaganda. That's the BBC, okay? That is the state news organ. Okay, so now what that confirms is that the Channel migrant crossings, they are all about the interest and the welfare of those migrants. That is what we are required to protect. That's what we're required to be concerned with. So the current negotiations between the government and the French, I don't see any possibility of any beneficial solution coming out of it, even if I thought the politicians intended that, which I think they certainly don't. I suspect the underlying agenda is, how do we make the situation worse? How do we increase the numbers of migrants? How do we keep the mass immigration to Britain at full blast? What I'd be interested to see, what I suspect is likely to happen, is that some kind of British Immigration and Asylum Office will be set up on the French mainland, so that migrants can then apply. They don't have to make that dangerous crossing in order to apply for asylum. They just have to queue up at an office in France, and then perhaps the British government puts them on a boat and takes them over to the UK. Now I would expect that will be balanced out by more money and another agreement or more money going to the French to encourage them to increase their number of patrols, which may increase for a little while, for 6 months or a year. But what I think, if that happens, the thing that will grow is the increased patrols. They will fall away and they will eventually cease to happen, and what will remain and grow will be some kind of expanding immigration and asylum office on the continent in order to bring people over to Britain, so that the British government can then become the servant of and the handmaiden to providing a taxi service to the smuggling gangs, the migrant gangs, to whom they have already subcontracted British immigration policy. That is the long-term outcome. I suspect we're going to see a tiny little beginnings of it over the next 6 months or year in the ruckus, the current ruckus between Johnson and Macron, who are performing a little bit of pantomime. Don't be fooled by that pantomime that I began with, that I showed you here. I'll just go back to it again. Don't be fooled by all this business. France takes aim at UK PM's migration, double talk and channel. Emmanuel Macron and Boris Johnson clash over crisis. That's just a distraction thing. The aim is to make the situation worse. They are going to. I think they will do that until the situation simply breaks down, because it is quite obviously unsustainable. So, we will see what happens. Thank you.